Good evening, everybody. My name is Dmitro Pustovit. Our guest for today is Volker, an American diplomat and foreign policy expert who's held various prominent roles in U.S. and international affairs. He's best known for Ukrainians for his work as U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations in 2017 and 2019. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Volker, thank you for taking the time speaking to us. And the last time we spoke was during a special marathon we hosted on the day of the US presidential election. And let me start with this question. Did you anticipate that Donald Trump would win the election?
Yes, I did. I had been following the campaign and the polling data very closely. And it was clear to me that he was going to win the swing states, and that would give him enough votes in the Electoral College. It was also clear he was going to win the Senate. The House was not as clear, and indeed the margin in the House is only 2 votes. So it was very, very close in the House. But for Trump winning the presidential election, absolutely.
Okay, from your perspective, how will his primarily differ from that of Ms. Harris had she won the election?
Right. I think with Harris, you would have had a continuation of policies that we had under President Biden. When it comes to Ukraine, that means a great deal of support, but not a clear strategy for victory, and a lot of restraints on that support as well. So I think that's what we would have expected from Harris. With Trump, he is pushing for an end to the war as quickly as possible. He will no doubt call Vladimir Putin very soon, tell him to stop the war. And he knows that we have to establish a position of strength in order for this war to end. Putin does not feel deterred right now. He feels like he can continue to attack. He may even feel like he's winning. And so in order to get him to stop the war, we have to show greater strength. And I think that's what I expect to see from President Trump.
If I'm not mistaken, candidate Harris did not promise to finish the war in 1 day, in 24 hours, but Trump did. And now they say they need 100 days to make some global change in Ukraine-Russian war. Is it enough, 100 days?
I don't think it's wise to put out these numbers, because all it does is increase the pressure on us to deliver something by a certain date. It's more important that it be done right, and that it be done, that there's a ceasefire, that it turns into a just peace. That's what needs to happen, and I don't know that you can put a timeline on that. 1 day was never realistic. 100 days is possible, but we simply don't know. It's going to depend on whether Putin feels that he really needs to end the war.
So, yeah, when it comes to Russia-Ukraine war, do you believe that Donald Trump will be able to bring it to the end? Not in 100 days, but during his presidential?
Right. Well, it depends what we mean by end. I think there will be a substantial change in the nature of the war this year in 2025, ratcheting down the violence, stopping the bombardments. I think that is possible. I don't believe it is possible to get Putin to give up on his goal. Putin's goal is the elimination of Ukraine and its incorporation into a larger Russian empire. He's going to have that goal no matter what. But if we can stop the hot phase of the war, stop the fighting and the killing, that can buy time for everyone to work together to strengthen Ukraine and to deter Putin, to make it too costly for him to attack again. It's not a matter of convincing him, it's a matter of demonstrating that there is sufficient capability that it is not worth it to him.
If we imagine 2 scenarios of the ending of Russia-Ukraine war for Donald Trump, what would be the best one and what would be the worst one?
Well, I think that a couple of things are almost inevitable. One of them is a ceasefire roughly along the current lines of contact, the fighting lines. That'll become a ceasefire line. Second, some kind of security assurances for Ukraine so that there is a clear commitment to Ukraine's security that could deter Russia going forward. Those are, I think, the elements that are inevitable. Now, what that looks like, it could be that there's a territorial swap if Russia wants to get Kursk back. Maybe they yield some territory to Ukraine. It could be that security guarantees end up being NATO membership, which is what I would favor. I think NATO is the most credible security guarantee in Europe. And I think that we have to work hard at building Ukraine's defense capabilities, its armed forces, its democracy, its reforms as quickly as possible so that Ukraine is immediately in a strengthening position from the time of a ceasefire. That is not very clear yet that is on the agenda, but that's what really has to happen.
Okay, thank you, sir. The fact that Trump's team managed to halt the conflict in the Middle East even before the official assumed the office, does that strengthen his position on the Russia-Ukraine front? And is it fair to draw any parallels here? Is it fair to draw any parallels here?
Yeah, I do think it's fair. If you look at what's happened over the past few years, we've had dictators around the world feeling emboldened, feeling that they are not deterred by the United States. They viewed the United States and the West as weak. So we saw Putin invade Ukraine. We saw Iran use its proxies to attack Israel and Western shipping and other interests. We see China using greater threats against Taiwan and its neighbors, Vietnam and the Philippines. We've seen Venezuela be more proactive in trying to flip governments in Latin America. So all of these dictators have been emboldened and feeling that they could act. What Trump is doing is reestablishing a position of American strength. And that's what Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah are reacting to. They see that they're going to be dealing with a stronger United States, and they are adjusting as a result. I think Vladimir Putin may see the same thing. He may see a U.S. with more resolve. And this comes at a time that is fortunate for President Trump because the Russian economy is in a worsening position now. Inflation is very high, and it is really running out of control now. Inflation rates interest rates are also very high. There's a labor shortage. They have lost an enormous number of people to the war, and that has harmed the economy and harmed the war effort. So Putin is in a position where he actually needs to have an end to the war sometime this year. So I think seeing that and seeing a strong United States will probably create the formula for getting this war to a different stage this year.
Okay, so they say every single war finishes with negotiation. And what does it mean that Mr. Trump plans to hold direct negotiations with Vladimir Putin? Is there a possibility that Russian leader could sway Trump into his side?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that Trump is very well aware that he wants to be seen as a strong leader who established a just peace. He doesn't want to be seen as having been dominated by Vladimir Putin or be a loser compared to Putin being a winner. So I think that dynamic is very sensitive for Trump. And because he's in a stronger position than Putin is, I don't think it's likely he would just be swayed to support the Russian view.
Well, this day you can read on the internet that Putin now is in his very best strength position. Do you agree?
I don't. No, I think this is what the Russians want to tell us. This is what they want us to believe. Whenever the Russians say anything, you don't listen necessarily to what they're saying. You ask yourself, why are they saying it? And in this case, because Russia is weak economically, militarily, they are telling us that it's strong.
Well, one of your latest interview, you said that the weakness of Russian is the energy part. How so? They are so powerful, energetic country. They have gas, natural gas, and oil, and etc. How is that their weakness?
Well, just look at the numbers now. Gazprom is losing money. They are in a state government deficit, so they are spending more than they are taking in. Used to be that Gazprom was a cash cow for the Russian government, and it was delivering money that they could spend. Now they are in a deficit. They're spending 40% of the state budget on the war effort, something they can't sustain for a long time. They don't have access to foreign reserves, so they are drawing down what hard cash reserves they have. They are probably within 9 months to a year of running out of currency. And that, meanwhile, as they're not putting a stop to inflation, that is just going to get even more expensive for them. And with the U.S. and President Trump coming in, we're going to increase U.S. energy production and energy exports, and that will have an impact on lowering world prices. So Russia will be getting less money for whatever gas it is able to export. And the sanctions that have recently been put in place by the Biden administration, including on the vessels that carry Russian oil, these are going to have an impact. And it's going to be very difficult for Russia to make money out of its oil and gas industry at the level that it needs to sustain the war.
Thank you, sir. So during his most recent conference, Donald Trump mentioned that he understands Putin's concern regarding Ukraine's potential NATO membership. Does this indicate that the U.S. president may be willing to make concessions to Russia on this issue in exchange for their cooperation in ending the war?
Well, I think you're right. He said that, and you're right that I read that as being he does not intend to proceed with Ukraine's NATO membership in the short term. What I think can be achieved, though, is silence. It's neither we just end the war, we just keep it simple and end the war, provide security assurances for Ukraine. And what happens with NATO membership is a question for the future. I think that's quite possible. Anything more than that would be giving Putin a victory. And as I said, I think Trump is very sensitive to the notion of being seen to having been bested by Vladimir Putin.
Do you think that Putin is prepared to any sort of compromise? And if yes, what kind of compromises could it be?
No, I don't think Putin is prepared to compromise. I think this is why I keep saying he has to be stopped. He has to be deterred. He's not going to give up on anything. He wants everything. He wants to destroy Ukraine. He wants to eliminate Ukrainian national identity and culture. He wants to incorporate it into a Russian empire. And he wants more than Ukraine. He wants the Baltic states, Finland, everything that used to be part of Russia. And so I don't think he's going to compromise. He has to be confronted with sufficient force, sufficient capability that he decides it's not worth it.
If Putin is not ready for compromises and he won't compromise anything, is it fair to ask Ukraine to compromise anything, including the territory?
Well, I think what is fair is to get an end to the fighting. I don't believe that Ukraine will or should recognize Russia seizing Ukrainian territory. I think that this is still going to be a matter of dispute. But it can be that it's a dispute to be resolved by political and diplomatic means, as President Zelensky said, rather than by military means, provided Russia is not using military force against Ukraine. That I could imagine. So a disagreement to be pursued over a longer period of time without military force.
Okay, thank you, sir. Regardless of how events unfold, Ukraine will critically need practical support from the United States. President Zelensky has openly stated this. We've heard it. What are your forecasts in this regard? And should we worry that America might disengage from this war in any way?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things that I think we should expect. One of them will be significant pressure from the Trump administration on European allies to do more. The US is currently providing half or more of the military support to Ukraine. They're going to want to see Europe do more. President Trump has already said he wants to raise the NATO defense spending target from 2% to 5%. Well, it may not eventually be agreed at 5%, but it's going to be more than 2. And I think that's significant. I think that if there's a need for a military presence in Ukraine, he will expect that to be European allies that do that rather than the United States. As for continued US support or Western support, I think that Trump is going to put some pressure on to seize the frozen Russian assets, the $300 billion, and for some of that to be used to buy American defense equipment. And then I think it's quite possible that he will go along with a legislative proposal to let Ukraine borrow money from the United States to buy American defense equipment. What the Biden administration did was provide aid, so out of the state budget and our US taxpayers paying for it. What I think Trump would be comfortable with is letting Ukraine borrow the money, pay it back later, but use that money to get the weapons that it needs.
Anyway, President Trump was the first American president who gave some weapon to Ukraine, and we appreciate it. Will he be the first president who will give Ukraine the crucial equipment and weapons to finish the war?
Well, it depends. I don't think that President Trump has that much hesitation about providing military support to Ukraine, but his focus is on ending the war. So if he can get Putin to stop the war, and then we can have a longer term program of strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities, I think that's where he's going to go. But if Putin refuses, if Putin wants to continue the war, ignores President Trump, escalates the fighting, then I think you could see even greater support coming from the US in response to that.
One of the most interesting things I've heard, and one of the most horrifying things at the same time I've heard on the internet and on YouTube was your part of your interview on the Cipher Brief, the latest one, when you discussed how similar could be situation in Ukraine, comparing it to East and West Berlin. Can you remember that? And,
yeah. East Germany. So at the end of World War II, Russia occupied Eastern Germany, and the US, UK, and France had saved Western Germany. The German Constitution required the restoration of German lands and unity of Germany, but was not going to be achieved militarily. So we had a standoff. We had a situation where East Germany existed for 40 years. And eventually there was German unification. Germany did get its territory back, and it occurred peacefully. But I think that there's a precedent for stopping the war, saving the part of the country you can save, bringing them into NATO, bringing them into the European Union, and strengthening the country, and not giving up on getting the territory, all of the territory back.
Yeah, and it took more than 40 years to accomplish that hard task. But the main difference I see in this situation that no one made people in communist, in occupied territory of Germany speak foreign language. No one made them to use Russian language or any other language. No one made them to have this Russian culture, and no one made them to believe in everything Russian propaganda says in Russian language. This is the more and the longer Ukrainian territory is occupied by Russians, the harder for us to deoccupy them via civilized and political and diplomatical way. Do you believe that we can liberate our territories in military way?
Well, that's the problem, is the alternative to a ceasefire where it is continuing the war. And it is not clear that Ukraine on its own has the ability to take these territories back. So I think, and I think Ukrainian people are very tired of the war now. It has lasted a long time. It's taken a lot of toll on people. So I think that there is a need for Ukraine as well to have a bit of a break from this. But as you say, it's terrible. What Russia does in the territories that it occupies is absolutely unforgivable. And I do think that this will change over time, that Putin will not be there forever, that Ukraine will become a success story, a model for the occupied territories, and they will want to be part of Ukraine. And I think that it's going to happen. It's just very painful and very difficult to see Ukraine go through this right now.
Thank you, sir. And finally, in just a few hours, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as 47th President of the United States. Some in the expert community believe that, and I quote, the world will never be the same, and that we are entering a new sort of era in global politics. Do you believe we are indeed on the brink of such fundamental change and unpredictable events?
I do, actually. I think whoever said that, I think that's very astute analysis. Because several things are going to happen. Iran is going to be deterred from attacks against Israel and in the Middle East. We're going to see Saudi Arabia and Israel get back on track in aligning themselves in the Middle East against Iran. I would not be surprised if during the course of Trump's second term, we see regime change in Iran coming from within, not from outside, but coming from within. I think Russia's war against Ukraine will be stopped, and Russia will have damaged itself severely for a generation to come. I think that the focus will really move toward China and Asia, where China is in a strong position still and has territorial ambitions of its own, and we're going to have to build back against that. And I think that Trump is also taking such a transactional approach, even with allies, that it is taking a lot of people by surprise. Finally, there is a risk of a trade war globally. So not military, but tariffs. And that could have significant impact on the global economy. So I do think we're moving into some uncharted territory.
So we have unpredictable leader in Russian Federation. Now we have sort of unpredictable leader in United States of America. What makes Trump unpredictable? It's not only about his temper, right?
Well, first off, I don't agree that Putin is unpredictable. Putin is quite predictable. He tells us, what he's doing in various ways, including I was at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, where he rejected the European security architecture. In July of 2001, he wrote a long essay explaining why he believes Ukraine doesn't exist. So he's been very clear, I think quite predictable. And his ambition, because it's a system of power, one where he rests on the use of power in order to remain the leader of Russia. You can expect him to do that. So I think Putin's quite predictable. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he is unpredictable, and he relishes being unpredictable, and he likes to be extreme. He likes to take very contrarian, difficult positions, because that creates negotiating space where then he can get things that he wants. So I think that's what he's doing there. I do believe that this will, and I'm quite optimistic about 2025. I think it will end up better as a result of Trump's willingness to show strength and his unpredictability.
Okay, then speaking about predictions, the last thing I promise. So tomorrow we're going to hear inauguration speech of Donald Trump, 37th president. Will he mention Ukraine in his speech? How do you think?
If he does, I think it's going to be along the lines of what he has already said, is that it's a terrible war. We need to stop the carnage. It wouldn't have happened if he was president, and he's going to end it as quickly as possible. If he does mention it at all, I think that's what you should expect. Nothing more in a public setting than that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time, and I hope to see you in person or talk to you in any other day. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your
Thanks so
time.
much. Been a
Slava
pleasure.
Ukraini and God bless America.
Героям
Goodbye.
слава.